Hi everyone, it's Nick with Build Up Advisory Group, and it's Fast Forward Fridays, a web series where we will quickly build what you know about infrastructure design in the nonprofit sector. Today's fastball topic is the role of infrastructure in storytelling. We hear the phrase, it's all about the story, all the time. Storytelling is a way to deeply connect with diverse audiences, communities, partners, and, well, donors. A compelling story is one that resonates with a person that doesn't know your organization or its work, but compels that person to engage, partner, or fund you. In other words, they're inspired to support you because of hearing your story. What I think is missing from our storytelling in this sector is the consideration of infrastructure. Now, before you say, Nick, of course you'd say that, hear me out. In order to tell a compelling story that allows an organization to show up consistently and sustainably for the communities it serves, you need to include the role of infrastructure in producing the outcomes in your story. That infrastructure assessment will inform a story about your ability to sustain impact within communities in need. When you don't include infrastructure in storytelling, you're not only limiting your story, but you're also diminishing outcomes for vulnerable communities. So, what do I mean? Consider a social justice organization that's telling its story about how it fights for racial equity by improving economic opportunities for certain vulnerable communities. In their storytelling, they talk about their programmatic needs, even staffing that they need for the programs and services they provide to that community, and they describe the outcomes they've had and the way they've supported and been led by the community, and how the community's access to basic resources is improving. As a result, they receive a 1 year project support grant for their work. They're happy and live to serve another year. They've told their story, but it's not the complete story because behind these programmatic needs lie the organization's infrastructure needs that they haven't talked about as part of their story. And these needs almost always determine how consistently an organization can show up for a community. And because they haven't discussed these additional infrastructure needs, they receive funding that reflects the needs that were discussed. So we clearly need to include infrastructure needs and capacity as part of our story. But how does an organization actually include infrastructure needs and consider infrastructure as part of its storytelling? Well, what if the organization thought they needed a more engaged board for its stage of development because they're not receiving the kind of support they need at this time from the board? And what if they included all of the operations, finance, and legal support that goes into the creation and vetting of the program or the delivery of services? Maybe they were thinking about significantly increasing their advocacy for legislative change to ensure that this community and others like it are protected. So they're thinking about evaluating their organizational structure and design. My point is, there's a lot about infrastructure that's left out of this story. This is why flexible, unrestricted funding with capacity building support should be your default. You have to use your voice to request this kind of funding or to provide it. You use your voice to tell your story. Your ability to show up sustainably for communities that need you is part of that story. So when you marry that story narrative with a budget, it should request support for both programmatic and infrastructure support. If you cannot articulate your infrastructure needs, you're not telling a complete story. And if you're listening to a story and not asking about infrastructure needs, you should know that you're not hearing a complete story. And you're both missing the opportunity to better support a community. By not considering infrastructure, you're telling a less compelling story, fostering a misunderstanding of needs, and perpetuating an underappreciation of the amount of work it takes to sustain innovation and change. You have to tell a story that connects infrastructure with your why. That is how you tell a story that can both inspire and sustain. And that's our fast build. I want to hear how you are thinking about infrastructure in your organization's storytelling. I would love to hear from you and about your experience in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend and keep building bravely.